Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. Today I want to talk a little bit about some of the small changes coming into the PTR. None of these changes have gotten implemented as of 11th 25th, 1:40 p.m. Eastern. I guess the servers are down for now, so maybe they are getting updated. That or simply Dalaran is bugged as a city. But I was trying to get on PTR to test one of the changes that happen on Wowhead. These changes, as far as being understand, have not been implemented yet, but are waiting to. This change for subtlety rogues in particular might be either one of the best changes, yet one of the worst changes for PvP. It's definitely one of the best changes when it comes to PvE content, and as far as I know, subtlety has a potential to be one of those specs to be the top DPS as it was in a past expansion. But for PvP, I don't really know how this change works. So let's talk a little bit about Shadow Nova. Shadow Nova is one of those traits for subtlety rogues for the artifact weapon that doesn't really get the most priority. For the most part, you're trying to get Finality, you're trying to get Akari Soul, and then in the end, you're trying to get Shadow Nova. In its current state, Shadow Nova is pretty bad of a trait. It's kind of useless and doesn't really get that much play, simply because it is so specific. It actually just doesn't get that much use out of it. When you're talking about its effect isn't actually bad. So Shadow Nova, as it is right now, once you come out of stealth, it deals AoE shadow damage. So this is okay for getting openers on targets and some AoE style situations for PvE, but it's not that much damage, and plus you don't really get to use the ability. One of the weirdest ways to actually trigger this ability, and I'm not sure if this is meant for, if Blizzard meant for rogues to be doing this, but let's say if you do want to do some damage with Shadow Nova and as an AoE, you need to press Shadow Dance, have the buff of Shadow Dance up on your character. Before Shadow Dance buff runs out, you have to hit Shadow Dance again, so it's almost like you're refreshing the buff. So we already see that this ability has really specific uses and doesn't deal enough damage for any rogues to really feel like, hey, I really should try to utilize this. They changed it in the PTR and they did one of the coolest changes, but might be one of the worst for PvP. Let's talk about it from PvE perspective and why it's awesome. Shadow Nova, the changes to, after using Shadow Strike or Cheap Shot, you have a 30% chance to explode, dealing shadow damage to all nearby enemies. That is awesome, and what they did recently in the newest change that is on Wowhead right now, they changed the 30% to a 100% chance to explode. So every time you use Shadow Strike or Cheap Shot, you deal extra shadow damage. And if you have Akari Soul, that means you're dealing Shadow Nova damage when you stun or use Shadow Strike. Then you have Akari Soul coming in a couple seconds afterwards, which they changed it recently was 2 seconds on the PTR. 2 seconds afterwards to deal extra shadow damage to your single target. So that is awesome. So what they're doing is making this talent really useful by basically tagging in extra shadow damage every time you use Shadow Strike or Cheap Shot. For PvE, AoE fights, this might not be the best for rogues, as rogues, subtlety rogues are probably still going to use Shuriken Storm to just generate a ton of common points, but for cleave mechanics or Mythic Plus dungeons, this is actually awesome. One of the things that rogues could be doing in Mythic Plus is more CC, and subtlety is a spec that can bring a lot of CC, because you can cheap shot stun any target and completely stun lock them out of their cast, because Mythic Dungeon mobs allow you to do so, since these mobs are actually pretty hefty in terms of their damage and how much of a nuisance they are. So for subtlety, this is great news, as we've seen Moonwalker Monks and Demon Hunters being used in Mythic Plus at a pretty high rating, or pretty high, I guess, plus level, where AoE stuns have been able to allow you to stun lock the mobs for a little bit, burst them down to get through a really just obnoxious part of the dungeon. So this will allow subtlety rogues to have a little bit more control without losing out on damage and giving you a little bit cleave mechanic. So this is cool. For PvE, this is one of the best changes, because that means Shadow Strike gets extra shadow damage every time you use it. So that is good. That makes me happy, because it's like one of the best changes to make an ability where it was somewhat used or seldom used to actually useful, awesome trait change. It's like, why haven't we thought of this before? This is great. So good job for Blizzard. For PvP, however, this ability might be one of the best, yet one of the worst, especially for PvP. So let me talk a little bit about why I think so. Shadow Nova damage that adds to your Shadow Strike, that is a plus. Shadow Nova damage that adds to your Cheap Shot, that is a plus, because that generally says that, hey, as a subtlety rogue, even if your Shadow Strike might hit like a wet noodle, you know, between 70k and 80k, maybe 100k if you crit, you know, so on average, your non-crits would be about 70k, 80k or so. To get a little bit extra, like 20k, maybe even 30k shadow damage on top of it, Oh, that is the awesome, that is the best change I've ever seen. Because basically it means your shadow strikes actually deal decent damage, and your cheap shots on top of it actually deal damage. So when you're stun locking your enemy, it doesn't feel like, oh, you know, I'm just stun locking them, but where's my damage coming in? Does it come in later? Does it come in now? You know, all that jazz. But for PvP, for subtlety, with the way that it's played currently, with its CC heavy playstyle, this might be one of the worst changes ever. I could already imagine a few scenarios, because Akari Soul already kind of messes up subtlety a little bit here and there. Akari Soul, even if you're trying to CC the enemy, right? Let's say you cheap shot the enemy and then you want to go for CC right afterwards. Akari Soul does not care if you're CCing the target or not. Even if you throw a blind on the enemy, Akari Soul, which is a trait for subtlety rogues, will still hit the enemy. So Shadow Nova is an AoE. And let's say you sap an enemy, right? Say you sap a healer, and you open up with one walker. You open up with a cheap shot. Cheap shot. Shadow Nova just broke your sap. That is very annoying. Let's say you blind the healer, right? You blind the healer, and you're about to take out the red, and you want to deal damage. You have Shadow Dance ready to go. You got a bunch of Shadow Strikes to sink it to him. The red literally goes to sit next to the healer, and you know that if you Shadow Strike this guy, you are going to break your blind, and you kind of need it. So what do? Do you hit him? Do you just backstab him? You have all this Shadow Dance ready to go and everything, and it's like, what do? I only can see a few situations where this would actually be pretty, I guess, obnoxious to play against in PvP. With the way subtlety currently is played, you're playing a CC heavy playstyle, which isn't a bad playstyle. It's kind of like what subtlety has to do right now. It's a playstyle where you have to rotate combinations of your kidney on the enemy healer, catch as many saps as possible, get your blinds up as soon as possible, and spread your damage, since you don't really have that much burst damage, or, well, I guess real burst damage as a subtlety rogue in patch 7.1. So you basically have to spread your damage and CC to whittle your enemy and chip away at them over time. And one of the things that's going to be good for damage is going to be Shadow Nova. Shadow Nova will mean you deal more damage to more than one enemy in Battlegrounds. It means you're dealing damage to a single target enemy that you're hitting in arenas. It just means you're dealing more damage, and that is a good thing. But one of the issues I can see with it is breaking of CC. So I guess my question would be is this. If Shadow Nova damage, being tagged to Shadow Strike and Cheap Shot, is enough to make subtlety feel like you are dealing solid sustained damage, might not even be burst damage, but enough where in a stun lock you can actually kill somebody, I'll be fine with this. Because then it's like, oh, you have to be a little bit more careful for CC, but if you know, even if you do break CC, at least you have some solid damage to back yourself up. And it's not like a solid damage increase. Shadow Nova is only, like, in PvP, between 20k and 30k worth of extra shadow damage. So when you have, let's say, a 70k Shadow Strike, 20 or 30, let's say 30k Shadow Nova hit, so about 100k average, which is nice. And this is not accounting for crits that you might be able to get from your Shadow Strikes, maybe even Weapon Master procs from your Shadow Strikes. So might be really good. It has potential. Yeah, I'm not gonna say it does have potential, but it could. I'm not gonna say it does and say it's guaranteed, but maybe. So if it has potential to be a game changer and allow you to deal damage enough to where you can stun lock a target and kill him, then yeah, CC doesn't really matter. But if CC is going to be still a thing and is going to be very, very important for subtlety, which I'm going to say it probably will be, then Shadow Nova is going to be a bit obnoxious to deal with. Because then with Shadow Nova, you are tying an AoE with every single of your normal abilities. You're trying an AoE damage with Shadow Strikes and Cheap Shots. So in PvP, it might be even one of the situations where it's like, even if I have every single artifact trait, I don't want to get extra Shadow Nova damage if I want to play subtlety, you know? And I understand kind of what Blizzard has done for every rogue spec. Every rogue spec has an AoE based ability where you are able to deal almost randomized. Well, with subtlety is going to be a little bit more predetermined, but for Outlaw and Assassination it's going to be randomized AoE damage. For Assassination we have Bag of Tricks, where on your Envenoms you have a chance to smash a vial of poison onto your enemy. Assassination is the spec that doesn't really have that much CC. All you have is damage, so you're trying to get as much damage as possible. So there I feel like there's no issue. With Outlaw, it is a chance on your run-throughs to deal AoE damage. Now, I would say that might be a little bit obnoxious, because let's say you have an enemy sitting a sap and you have the other enemy standing next to him and you break him out of AoE. I feel like for Outlaw it does kind of hurt, but we don't really see that many Outlaws for reasons, so I guess it doesn't really matter for Outlaw that much. I feel like for Outlaw it procs way more often when you have burst up, like when you're using your artifact weapon, and as long as you're not rolling the bones back to back, you're using run-throughs back to back. So there you kind of want to have as much damage as possible, and for the most part CC is not really an issue. So I feel like it accidentally ends up mashing up well for Outlaw. For subtlety on the other hand though, it might be kind of detrimental. It actually might, I don't know. It's a really good idea, but it might suck. So maybe if Blizzard could make it so that AoE abilities, right? Let's say you have Shadow Nova. Let's say if they made it so it does not break any CC around you, that'd be awesome. Because then let's say an enemy is sapped and you're using Shadow Nova back to back, the enemy is taking shadow damage, but the sap isn't breaking. Then you have this ability that deals like really negligible damage, doesn't break CC, but it still allows the subtlety rogue to deal as much damage as possible. I think it's a kind of cool thing. Even if they make it so that Shadow Nova simply doesn't hit people that are CC'd, then that'll be fine too. You know, I really don't know what to say, man. I think Shadow Nova is an interesting change. We'll see how it is for PvP. Yeah, I don't really know. But I am excited that it did happen. I just had a few concerns. So what are your thoughts on the ability, guys? Let me know what you think about the artifact trait in comments below. Do you think it will be a good thing for you, especially if you play a subtlety rogue? Let me know, do you think it would be a good thing for PvP, or not as good as all of us might think? Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.